Ah yes, another productive day at Alex Horatio Studios. I guess the only thing left to do is to settle down into bed. Fuck, I haven't done a video. Okay, here we go. So I believe that soon enough Godot will actually become a pretty impressively dominant market force, and it has potential to be above that of Unity and Unreal, so I've got a few reasons for this which I have laid out, so I'll go through them one by one. Number 1. Godot is, as many of you might realise, open source and MIT licensed. This means that it is actually incredibly attractive to small to mid-scale indie studios since the engine is free, something which is actually quite important for startup companies where profits and funds are already pretty razor thin. So as far as the law is concerned, you can do anything you like with the Godot engine and nobody has got the credentials to tell you otherwise. However, Godot is not just free in monetary terms, as I'm sure many viewers of my channel know by now. The Godot engine is free in the sense that you can literally take the source code, do anything you like to it, compile it and use it. It helps that Godot has genuinely some of the nicest, most intuitive source code I've ever seen. You wouldn't believe it's a product of a decade's work. I mean, those big projects like that tend to harbour a few bad practices which sprawl into horrible spider webs of crazy, confusing code, and these usually leave the project dead and half-functional in a gutter somewhere. It's not very nice, but now the reason for this is in part because of the incredible repo maintainers, but also because they made the design decision early on to build most of the engine using objects and logic which every Godot game developer would learn while learning how to use the engine in the first place. Well, let me clarify. The engine is basically entirely control nodes. The build and run button is at the top of the editor is a standard button node, and the scene tree is organized via HBox containers. So this means that anybody who knows how to use the engine has a surprisingly good chance of being able to augment it by editing its source code without having to spend a massive chunk of time figuring out how it all works. Now, I can confirm this as someone who's sent, I think, 3 or 4 pull requests to the engine by now, despite having little to no C++ experience. On second thought, maybe that's not such a great thing to advertise for Godot's sake. No, the actual adjustments I have done are very minor, but the point is, it's easy. Now, number 2, whether you agree with the points that I've laid out already or not, Godot is growing at a very rapid rate. Now, since Godot doesn't facilitate any kind of user counting analytics in itself, as it respects your privacy, it's kind of difficult to accurately quantify in absolute numbers how many people use it. However, in the past year, the project has nearly doubled in its number of GitHub favorites from a little over 8,000 to up to nearly 16,000. The global game jam saw a grand total of 0 entries using the Godot engine in 2017, whereas this year it received a respectable 75, which is actually an infinity% increase. So these numbers themselves aren't huge, but this level of growth is indicative of something quite special. Plus, the nature of Godot means that the more people know about it, the faster it improves. The faster that it improves, the more people will use it and tell their friends. The more people tell their friends, the more people know about it, etc. It's a self-perpetuating cycle, which can only really go up, and it's showing no signs of slowing down just yet, and honestly, I have no reason to believe that it will in the near future either. So for context, Unity has about 300,000 active monthly users, and honestly, I'd be surprised if Godot even broke 30,000 active monthly users, but considering that Unity has been around since 2005, whereas Godot only first publicly released in 2014, I'd say that Unity has had a hell of a head start. That's 9 years. Not to mention that Unity is backed by a for-profit corporation which gathers and spends large quantities of money to ensure that its product is advertised, marketed, and kept in the forefront of the industry. Now, pretty much the entire payroll for Godot is the $8,000 a month it makes on Patreon, which is split between 3 full-time developers plus a hell of a lot of community work. Now, the net worth of Unity Technologies is $2.8 billion, and in 2017 it saw a healthy $300 million in revenue. So this means in terms of gross revenue, Unity is making about 37,500 times more than the Godot engine, and despite that, Godot is still providing a pretty reasonable alternative. Now, number 3, big engines' reputations are spiraling out of control. Now, this really isn't about Godot's merits, kind of the inverse of that. Consumers frequently associate the Unity trademark with low-quality asset flips and type things like that, and Unreal isn't necessarily far behind. Godot is essentially a clean slate as far as consumers are concerned, with relatively few commercial products actually using it, and even then, any trace of Godot iconography can easily be scrubbed out for other things, which is not the case for the free version of Unity. While big engines keep going downhill and becoming more and more synonymous with trash in the eyes of the masses for better or for worse, more and more developers coming up from this crowd will hesitate to even touch them in favour of smaller or lesser known engines like Godot. Now finally, number 4, it is very difficult to kill an open source project, whereas all it takes to kill Unity is for Unity technologies to start to slow down, which will inevitably lead to another cycle where they don't have the money to sustain themselves, which means people will get fed up and leave in favour of other engines. Once the company's gone, the engine is gone, especially since the engine requires a login, it requires an account, it requires licensing, and if the company's not around to serve you those things, the engine isn't going to stay around. However, if Juan and Remy suddenly died via simultaneous lightning strike, the project would be forked, recovered, and development would continue on as normal to a large degree, and that's assuming that they're the only two maintainers, and I don't even think they are. The engine is inherently resilient, and even if they were somehow bought out, it could easily be forked from the most recent MIT licensed commit to make 2 versions of the engine, the proprietary Coca-Cola brand Godot engine, and then the open source one. Now this is the kind of reason that Linux is still around, even though adoption is hellishly slow. If we get a year of the Linux desktop, Godot will be all over that for Linux-based game developers. Although, of course, year of the Linux desktop is the current year. So this is the year of the Linux desktop, but also the next year. Just thought I'd mention. Anyway, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos about Godot, game development, whatever. And other videos where I try to pad out the ending with an improvised bit because it was looking a bit too short in the script. So there you go. That's why that bit about the year of the Linux desktop was there. I don't know, that wasn't very good, but see ya.